My name is Molita Yazi, and I am the Director for Tribal Dementia Programs at IA Squared. And thank you for joining us in our part one of our three-part webinar, American Indian and Alaska Native Resource Center for Brain Health webinar series. We're going to just go ahead and get started. We have a very informal webinar, a very informal series here today. We have the agenda in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and start with Dave Baldridge. Dave, can you introduce yourself? And Dave's going to do our opening prayer for us.
Sure. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Dave Baldridge, member of Cherokee Nation, who has lived in Albuquerque for 30 years or so. I've been a partner and a good friend of Jay Neil's for nearly as many years as that. And I always look forward to every opportunity to work with him. I'm really proud of the many initiatives that IA Squared has started and has ongoing. And I feel quite proud to say I think we're sort of leading the charge in many respects of dementia care in Indian country. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mary Ann. I am the Public Health Programs and Communications Associate for IA Squared. I want to thank you all again for attending, like Dave said. I also want to encourage you all to introduce yourself in the chat. At this time, Bree, if you want to pull up the first slide, and we'll go into some housekeeping. So as you notice, the meeting is being recorded. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat, and we'll do our best to address those questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. Throughout the presentation, I encourage you all to think about what webinars or resources would benefit your organization as they relate to working with ADRD and American Indian or Alaska Native populations. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Bree.
Back in its very early formative days, Bill and I conceived that we would really create an international organization. And we only took a half step or two in that direction as our attention turned almost exclusively to American Indian, Alaska Native issues in the US. But that's where the IA Squared came from. Jay Neil was around back then.
Okay. Thank you, Dave, for that. Bree, if you want to.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Ann. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Molita. I know that there is a few messages that there. Please let us know any more issues. I think that the chat should be working now. So I am going to be talking about Dr. Neil Henderson, who is our main panelist today. Dr. Neil Henderson is a PhD and is from Choctaw Nation, born in Southeast Oklahoma, raised in and around Oklahoma and Florida. Dr. Henderson has 40 plus years of professional work and has always addressed preventative disease, reduction of health disparities, and building healthier lives among youth, adults, and elders in culturally diverse populations. He's been working with the Memory Keepers too as well. And Dr. Henderson has worked very closely with IA Squared, and it's been wonderful having him on our team. Dr. Henderson, would you like to say anything else of your accomplishments, your many accomplishments that you have done?
Well, I've lived a long time now, and so those things do tend to add up. And when it comes to the Member Keepers Medical Discovery Team, I was the founding executive director of that, and am now retired from there, but also remain with a professor emeritus status in the Department of Family Medicine and Biobehavioral Health at University of Minnesota. And I have done some of the earliest work in dementia research with tribes, biological work to start with, and then more sociocultural matters. And in recent years, a strong focus on matters related to caregiving for people across Indian country who are responding to the needs of an affected person.
Great. Thank you, Neil, for the introduction. So we're going to jump right in now and start with Dr. Neil Henderson's presentation. Take it away.
Okay. One of the things I want to focus on in this particular presentation is the potential action steps that caregivers can take, ideally, to be able to reduce the number of times and moments in which a person who's got declining cognition is upset, and ways to talk about even preempting those. And so I borrowed this statement out of the original Savvy Caregiver program. Don't just do something, but stand there. And it sounds the opposite of do anything, just do something, even if it's wrong. Well, this is the opposite of that. And I want to answer the question marks during this presentation of why that is. And first, I want to also just hit a few of the highlights, because we have I think, a very diverse audience. And so some people often are new to this topic area, and others have been in it quite a while. And so I want to begin with just a foundation of the general expectations of what constitutes the kinds of cognitive impairments that are occurring for the person who's affected. And I use this device, and I call it the 5 A's. There's in the letter A, 5 of them. And I always start with the first one is of amnesia. And for dementia, it is generally starting with a specific kind of amnesia, calling short-term memory. Yeah, on the slides, Brianna, if you're the one doing it, yeah, we don't need to advance them just yet. So the amnesia part of it and short-term memory part of it is some of the early signs. Longer term effects will also occur as time goes by. A second one in a letter A is aphasia, and that refers broadly to communication and, of course, speech. And one of the things that we understand, of course, is that the ability to be verbal and cogent declines over time. And eventually, the person is not likely to be speaking verbally at all, and yet may at the same time continue to make vocalizations. And eventually, that will also drop out. I think with aphasia, the most important thing to remember, though, is that while that part of the brain is certainly having significant problems, the verbal part, the part that we all have up and running all the time and are not very aware of it, but that's the nonverbal part of communication. And that ability in a person that's got some kind of dementia persists long after the person can't speak well anymore. And so there is in communication this ability to react to and to be sensitive to matters that are voice tone, kind of touch, being rushed. Those are kinds of things that aren't words, and yet they're communications. And that can be something that can either be upsetting to the person if it's not done in a loving way, or if done in a loving way, that will be something that is calming and feels very good and produces a sense of security. Another one of the A letters is apraxia, A-P-R-A-X-I-A, and that refers broadly to changes in the person's ability to move physically move in a normal fashion, in a coordinated way. People slow down. There's often some fine motor skill that is noticeable and is declining. And if that is something that an individual is having some significant effects from, that is going to increase the risk for falls. And so it's very important that we pay attention to that, because it's not exactly what we might define as cognition, but it is most often a part of the overall and broad outcomes of dementia. Another one is acumen, the letter A, acumen. And acumen, in this case, I'm using to refer to executive function. And that is the person's ability to may be reasonable, to have good judgment, and to be able to have the items that we might call abstractions being lost, to imagine something, to forecast something, I'll do something in the future. Those kinds of abilities are changing. And notice that's not the same thing as memory. So it's important, I think, with all these A's, is that memory is one part of it, but certainly not the only part to consider. And the fifth A is agnosia, A-G-N-O-S-I-A. And this is the one that produces what we often see as unusual behavior, something that's really different than what the person behaved like in the past. And it generally is defined as the misperception of what is actually out there in that person's environment. I'll use an example later on in this presentation, but one way of looking at this is to imagine that the person is looking at a painting on a wall that has bright colored flowers, and yet they're banging on it. This is an actual circumstance. They're banging on it, trying to put the fire out. So although it's colorful flowers, their eyeballs are not the problem. It's how the brain interprets the signal that comes into the brain through the eye and the optic nerve. And so the issue of explaining some of this unusual behavior that can come up often falls under this concept of not being able to accurately and correctly interpret what's going on. And this can be not just visual, but in all the other sense inputs as well. And so if we put all five of those A's together, we can imagine that the role of the caregiver becomes more and more and more important over time. There are no medications right now that are going to make a substantial difference. Nothing is going to reverse it. And there's lots of research going on with medications. There's some other research going on that has to do with intracranial electric pulses designed to break up or prevent some of the protein buildup that's causing some of these symptoms that we've just now talked about. But today, it remains true that the caregiver is the best medicine. And I've said that for many years. I wish that was changing rapidly, and yet it isn't. Even though we can't cure this thing, there are things that we can do, and that is where educated caregivers come in. Okay, Brianna, can you go to next, please? So let's talk about how we talk about dementia. And the specific words that we might use, does that only reflect certain assumptions or types of thinking? And here's what I mean by that. It's very easy to medicalize this condition. It is a neurological problem. It is in many ways, a head to toe physiologic problem that is unstoppable at this point in time. And yet, should we be stuck with referring to this as a disease? Is that language something that actually reflects our view of it as a bunch of cells that have gone bad. Next. And another option about specific words, the word use itself can create certain kinds of assumptions. And we'll come to this in a little bit to reinforce it, and that is to think about our language from a medical and epidemiologic viewpoint of saying that this condition is, well, it ranges anywhere from 7 to 6, 5, and 4th leading cause of death in the United States. And it is a disease, and it is a fatal disease, and the person is dying of Alzheimer's disease or dying of dementia. Compare how that makes us behave and think and act when we replace that by a phrase that is, this person is living with dementia. That person does have a condition that is worsening, and yet there is still tremendous capacities left that we often can't imagine, maybe don't know how to bring out in that person and for that person. So it doesn't mean that there's not a problem going on, but it does mean that the person is living with different levels of capacity. And as caregivers, we need to be able to recognize that and bring out as much capacity as they can without overstressing them or over-expecting. Next. And so it may be that our words are consistent with some unstated, unconscious stigma about, and I'll use this term, crazy behavior. Next. And if we keep speaking in these ways of dying from dementia and the implied fear about being around this person, and that probably does perpetuate the stigma. Next. Now, notice in the title here, ways to construct a dementia-friendly view of health changes. I've benefited greatly from being around the Pyramid Lake Paiute a couple of times now over the past few years with Dave and Marianne, Brianna, Melita, and Bill Benson and others, Carla Eben from the tribe, about this approach of being dementia friendly. And that does mean ways of thinking about it and speaking about it that we just went over. Next. And so people in these specialties have for decades looked into what is the importance of the way we talk about disrupted bodily functioning. Now we're looking for a phrase that just kind of covers everything. So disrupted bodily functioning. Next. And in doing that research, people have made a distinction between the word disease and the word illness. Next. So disease has been reserved for the pathophysiology, that is the biological markers that are actually present and causing the symptoms and the degeneration in this particular condition. Next. But illness as a word has been reserved more for the lived experience of that biological disease. What are the social, psychological, and cultural experiences that the person has for any condition? Doesn't have to. I must have gone on mute there, so I'm not sure why that happened. Let me back up just one. So disease and illness. Disease is the biological part. Illness is the one that has been reserved for the lived experience of that biological disease. Next. And so what if we apply this and start using the term Alzheimer's illness rather than Alzheimer's disease? Now the person still has the same effects going on, but the way that caregivers and others talk about the condition when it's referred to as Alzheimer's illness removes some of that implied and unstated stigma of this person is diseased. This person is somebody I don't want to be around. Am I going to catch it? Am I going to get this disease? And code switching here to Alzheimer's illness may be something that would be helpful to bring about a different and slightly more positive approach. Next. And so if we say she has Alzheimer's illness compared to she has Alzheimer's disease, it can have implications. Next. Next. Just a quick way of looking at how we speak about these conditions. And the question is, are you sick? Somebody asks you, are you sick? Next. And so let's ask a couple of things next. And we might find out if we look into this, a simple question like this, are you sick? What do you mean by you? Is it my essence, my spirit, or my body? Next. And what do you mean by sick? There's all kinds of things that you could have that would be falling under the heading and term of sick, as you see there. Next. And one response might be, having dissected the sentences, I am not sick, my body is. So notice how language selection and these kinds of terms can shift our thinking and consequently behavior in directions that are less helpful or more helpful. Some of the earliest work here was done by this name you see here, Rudolf Virchow. Next. And he was working, as you can see by the date, quite some time ago. Next. And he was one of these people that just had, as I always put it about certain people, they have 3 or 4 brains inside of one skull. And what a major contribution of his was to recognize that social, psychological, cultural behavior and experience can turn into biological disease. And so we call those the social determinants of health compared to the biological determinants of health. Next. And so go ahead, next. He thought of disease or sickness, as he was calling it too, as the following. Next, click. He called it the disease, sickness, or our term illness is life under altered conditions. So again, we get rid of the underlying trajectory of dying, which we all are doing, some faster than others. But rather than a negative application of disease, it's just altered conditions. Now, if you're a clinician of some kind and you've got to do treatments, well, of course you get more specific. But we're talking here about kind of foundational ways of approaching people that are experiencing a condition in this, for our topics here today, of dementia, that can be, of course, life-altering. Next. So Alzheimer's illness, we're switching to that, Alzheimer's illness, it's a real thing, but during which life continues, but under altered conditions. Next. The title is this, let me bring your attention to that, cross-cultural ways that help us understand the ways that we reframe or can reframe altered bodily functions. So one way to think about this is we call it Alzheimer's disease. Let's ask the question, compared to what? And when we look at compared to what, we begin to develop more insights into the ways in which our thinking and language and behavior is shaped by the very ways that we think about it. And item number 2 here is a quote from a survey, worldwide global survey, reporting a kind of different way of different ways in which we as Western societies consider the power of the biomedical model. And the focus is mainly on cognitive function, impairment, terrifying event. The dementia is not described with negative connotations in all other cultures. Now, I inserted my own word into here. It's not described with negative connotations in all other cultures. But we see here a broad difference in how Western society, that is us, compared to other parts of the globe. Next. Next. So we're going to take a quick tour around the world here and just get a sense of how dementia is related to, how it is interpreted, how it is talked about in some other cultures. In Japan, the word here is bokeh. It means to become disoriented. It is significant in its disruption of social relationships, reciprocity in people giving and taking over time is impaired. Those are the important parts about it from a sociocultural view in Japan. And notice we haven't mentioned any, there's not one neuron is not mentioned. Beta amyloid is not mentioned, and so forth. It's all a much more of relationships. Next. India. These authors consider it to be dementia symptoms to be normalized, but to be classified as childlike behaviors. It is reported that elders are highly valued, but that those elders that do have this childlike condition do receive some negative stigmatization. Next. In China, again, normalized. The notion here is that if a person lives long enough, they're probably going to have memory loss, confusion, and need help. Now, I do know of neurologists for some times that would say things like, if we all lived to 150, we would all have symptoms of dementia. Well, we're not living to 150. And in this particular example from Charlotte Eichels, the notion is that for a person who lives a normal lifespan and yet goes a little bit over, will almost inevitably have significant changes. Next. And so dementia is a global thing, as you see here. And this is just an example from China. Next. Next. And so worldwide, and certainly the World Health Organization, but worldwide, as people are aging, we do understand that demographically, the people age cohort of 85 and older is the fastest growing age cohort globally, not just in industrialized nations, but globally. And so the issue of declining cognition in elder people is something that's happening everywhere, generally as a result of longevity. Next. A little closer to home here, African Americans have causation that's highly variable, but there is a notion of supernatural involvement, that is God's will as causation. There's also the notion here of more tolerant of symptoms due to resilience from decades and generations of coping with racism. And the second item, Latino feel like due to hard life experiences, the dementia can develop. There's also supernatural forces that may be involved, and you see the evil eye there, the mal de ojo. And family care in the home is emphasized, but causation is not considered to be something that relates directly to the neuropathies that our research is pretty much focused on. And third, Australian natives, your spirit is sick. There's a tiredness. The person is behaving in a childlike way. And there is a sense of the affected person being jealous of others. And so next is an interesting slide, I think, from Australia. And so what you're looking at here in the middle is a representation of the human brain. The person would be looking to your left as you look at the slide. The white part and the squiggle lines are the upper part of the brain, the cerebral cortex. The blue part toward the back, and then the bottom is the cerebellum. And then you see part of the midbrain and pons. But here's what the slide is about, the poster is about. And you see on the white part of the brain is this dark red line that ends in a kind of a bulbous shape. And it follows along one of the brain sulci that is defining the temporal lobe area. It is spoken of, dementia is spoken of and represented here graphically as a snake in the brain. That red line, red-black line is considered to represent a snake. And think about Australia, and there are those snakes and other kinds of critters that can be very, very dangerous. And so they don't, let me be clear about this. It is not that they literally believe there's a snake in the brain, but the danger of a snake and the importance and significance and experience of declining cognition is captured as a snake in the brain. And then you see around there a cluster of items that have to do with some Australian terms, like the person's growling more. That actually refers to negative mood, negative affect, complaining a lot, that sort of thing. And so this is being recorded, so be aware you can come back and look at this slide in more detail. Next. Next. So we're bringing this home now to Indian country and Alaska Native areas. And this is something that is based on work that I've done here in Oklahoma. And it was an elder woman who was experiencing significant cognitive decline. She also had severe type 2 diabetes, had a recent below-the-knee amputation on one side, and was incontinent of urine. And her granddaughter said to me, Pokney, which is the Choctaw name for grandmother, Pokney sees things we don't. And the importance of this is that rather than a hallucinatory neurologic kind of viewpoint of she sees things that aren't there, that's not how this was put or viewed. And that is, she sees things we don't. She's actually seeing into the other side before she dies. She is describing it and talking about it, and recognizable people, even recognizable horses, favorite horse, and dogs, garden, those kinds of things. And then begins to shift attention to what's happening more in her immediate environment. And so this symptom of dementia here that might be coded as hallucinations in this particular sense condition, and a number of families that I've been around also consider that part not to be hallucinations, but to be actual real experience. Next. Next. This is a graphic display that comes from Southern Ontario. And the reason, well, let me give you a little bit of the history of this. The first effort for people that were working with a particular part of the Anishinaabe population in Southern Ontario wanted a graphic poster. And so they put together a rock path. That's what this is supposed to be, a path of rocks that you walk on. And the big end was over on the left side of the page. That is, we begin with a lot of capacity, and then as over time it narrows and the path gets smaller and smaller. And when they showed it to some tribal leaders and knowledge keepers, they said, you've got it absolutely backwards. You start off constrained, and the new experience of this cognitive change is a new and expanding experience for the person. And so the poster, that the final version is this one. Next. And music can be brought out. That is Native music, Wichita affiliated tribes here in Oklahoma. And you could also go to the website for Banner Institute in Arizona and Phoenix, and they have put together a CD of music that is designed to connect across a generation for when the older person now was younger, and have a lot of native music in that. Next. Next. So IA Squared and Mike Splain and his group have worked together here, and notice that you see tribal law and policy related to the dementias. Again, not just issues of memory change and executive function. Next. Next. Another poster from IA Square, and these are some of the numbers that are important for people to understand and to be able to register that this is a moving, developing dynamic matter that's going on. These numbers will likely increase too. Next. Next. This is a poster that's fairly recent. And notice that it's connecting now cardiovascular health with brain health. And this, to make it a short message, healthy heart, healthy brain. And you may be able on your screens to discern the river of life flows through the heart, protecting the mind and the body. And so we're connecting together in this poster a number of important elements that are both biological and cultural. Next. This is a summit up at Pyramid Lake, and this is part of their Dementia-Friendly America that they work with Nevada, state of Nevada, as well as University of Nevada. Dr. Jennifer Carson is one, Carla Eben at the tribe, all are very much involved in this approach to seeing dementia in more positive ways. Next. What if we thought of Alzheimer's illness care as a ceremony of elder honor? And this is, I use this phrase of caregiver tasks and tricks. And you got to know how to do tasks well. That's just part of it. But, and the tricks, I'm coding that as some of the responses to an elder person that's having some upset. Next. Go ahead and Brianna, populate this whole slide here. That's good. Okay, so more than just seeing them tasks and tricks, but more than that, what if it was seen as part of a way, the tasks and tricks are seen as part of a way that are now we see ceremony, ritual in it, ritual repetitive actions that have meaning. It's not just nothing, but these are actions that have meaning. What if getting a person dressed was seen more as a ceremony of caring rather than just a set of tasks? Next. Next. So, thank you. So, how are we going to preempt, prevent, or reduce discomforts for those people that have Alzheimer's illness? How are we going to do that? I'm suggesting there, number one, you become your own in-home ethnographer. Now, I'm going to explain ethnographer. Don't let that throw you off here. And all it means is that an ethnographer tries to go to another culture that they're not experienced with and try to see how those people engage the world. What is their view of the world? How do they talk about it? How do they behave? Not how I behave. I know how I behave, for better or for worse. I want to know through their eyes, how does life look? Well, we're here not going to go to another culture, but we're going to ask ourselves the questions, how is it that the affected person with declining cognition, how do they experience day after day after day? How do they experience the household? How do they experience my caregiving? How do they experience my language or my voice tone? And so that really is being an ethnographer in your own house. Next. And so how do you do it? And this will take us here in the last few minutes. How do you do this so-called in-home ethnography? Well, we think of the household, a bunch of people, could have a bunch of people, it could have two. But any interactions that go on, that's talking with each other, accounting for each other, even you don't have to say anything, and yet you're around other people. All those are social interactions. Number two, adaptations refers to the experience that our plan for the day seldom ever goes exactly the way we thought it would that morning. And we make changes, we adapt. We try to get the same thing accomplished, but doing it a different way. Number three, there is just a pragmatic solution approach to most of these things of what works, what's going to get us there. Next. So all of that's going on every day in every home, or business, place, work, whatever it is. Next. I'll go ahead and fill this one in too, please. Okay. So imagine that the affected person is experiencing life in the household imagine how the affected person is experiencing life in the household at different points in time over the day. So how am I going to start to figure out what's going on? Well, look at number three. So life can be experienced as feelings of comfort, security, and love. Or number five, life is experienced with feelings of discomfort, insecurity, and disregard. So is the loved one in the household at number three at a particular moment, or at number five? And it probably is a mix of those things, but starting at some place, maybe it's getting them up in the morning, or maybe it's at breakfast, or maybe it's taking a walk. If there's feeling of discomfort, insecurity, and disregard, that's the one we want to change. Next. Next. Go ahead and fill this in. So how do we know how that person's feeling? Can you see a feeling? And I say yes, but what I mean is that the feelings are reflected in their behavior. Smiles, voices, or not, frowns, words, movements, withdrawal, all kinds of things are cues and clues as to what is their feeling state at that time. Words are going to be less available over time, and so you look for nonverbal things. Next. So when we look through the eyes of the affected person, when comfort is clear, when they feel like they're comfortable, stand there and ask yourself, what's going on? What led up to this time of comfort? And if it's not, if the person is experiencing discomfort, how can I restore that? But the answer to that question comes from first standing there. I don't mean that literally, but taking time to think about and observe what is going on in the larger context of the household and the caregiving. Next. Next. Yeah, go ahead and fill it in. Okay, and so we're back to where we started here in the middle part, the first part of this. Don't just do something, stand there. Next. And so we're suggesting that the caregiver, take an objective observational attitude to identify the many situations that may trigger discomfort in the person with altered thinking. But you objectify the affected person for a moment. That's the critical thing. This is not something where you disengage from them for hours or days at a time. Not at all. It's strictly for a moment. Let me try to think about what has happened here. Now, that's not a caregiving task in the conventional sense of helping someone put on a shirt or fixing a meal, but it should be a caregiving task that happens in the caregiver's mind and thinking of how to optimize the number of times in which the person can be comfortable. Next. Yeah. So these are some of the things that you look at in this being this home ethnographer business of the context. What's going on? What time of day does this discomfort occur? Is it repetitive and is it regularized? What place in the house or wherever they may be? Who's present, but also who's not present? What are big distractions that might be going on? The timing of it. Does it relate to a particular regular event of caregiving? I say number 6, jot these observations in a notebook and a notepad on the kitchen table or someplace, because it's real easy for the patterns that may be present to be missed if we think we're just going to hold it in our head the whole time. Next. One last, there we go. And so the idea here is that by trying to look for triggers, that we can possibly preempt some of these moments of discomfort for the person. Next. Let me ask you to go to the next one, Brianna. Next whole slide. Yes. Okay. Number 1. Okay. There's 2 more slides here, and then we're done. In the number 1 item here, mirror, a person from our memory disorder clinic, the woman, wife of the affected person, he would come down a hallway, and once he got into the other room where she was, he was extremely upset and agitated and so forth. And so she finally watched how this happens, and he would walk past a mirror in the hallway that he had never reacted to before, but now he was in a stage or phase in which he must have seen his own image as a threat, that someone else is out there looking maybe through a window, and he felt a threat from that. And so once she saw that happening, then all she did was use Scotch tape and newspaper and covered the mirror over, and he would just walk right past it. Number 2 is a caregiver strategy for the caregiver themselves, not doing something directly to the affected person, but for themselves. Was that when this person felt frustrated with all of the different things that were going on, she imagined her husband to have a big gauze bandage wrapped all around his head. And for her, that was a memory aid that the things that are going on that are frustrating to her are not done on purpose, but rather there is a problem going on inside there that we just can't see. Number 3, a urinary incontinence at a nursing home, and the affected person, I think, was seeing the difference in a blue carpet where the beds were in his room and bright white gleaming tile where the bathroom was, but it had a institutional kind of rubber threshold between the 2 floor surfaces. And he seemed, every time he got to that place, started backing up, and they got into basically a fight with the nurse aides. So I got some tan masking tape, regular masking tape, and covered that over, and he walked right past it. And that was not a problem again. These are just ways of observing what's going on, what's a trigger. Last slide. These are the ways in which you can have a mnemonic of the vowels in English to help you divide up what's in. There's lots of stuff going on at any moment in a household. So how do we get a handle on what things are there? And this is a menu of some of the things that you can look at to begin to try to piece together what are the issues, the factors, the triggers that are producing discomfort in order to preempt them by replacing the triggers with things that are going to either mute the effect of the trigger or possibly even prevent that problem at all. So we're going to stop here. So thanks for the opportunity to share these things with you. So I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Henderson. That's a very, it's a very thoughtful, thought-provoking and insightful look at how the cultural views and also the in-house ethnography. I never really thought about that, but in looking at my own mother, she's 90 years old. I can start to think about what you're saying. I was thinking about my mom all along the time that you're talking about the in-house ethnography, and it's awesome. Thank you so much. So now we're going to ask everybody if they have any questions for Dr. Henderson. So you can unmute yourself. Are they unable to unmute themselves, Brianna?
I will make sure that they are.
Okay, so go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question for Dr. Henderson. Oh, okay. Okay, says we can't unmute. They can't unmute. Okay, well, if you want to put your questions in chat, that would work too.
So we have one question from Barbara Green, who asks, Dr. Henderson, can you tell us more about music in the lives of those living with an Alzheimer's illness, the roles or impact of singing collectively?
Yes, here's what I know about this. And music is sort of like language in that it is in a way overlearned. And so it is something that even while the person is experiencing cognitive decline, language will last quite a while. And so the music part of this is something that evokes a recall that is through different channels of the brain compared to recalling your name or recalling where my bedroom is in the house and those kinds of things. And it has an emotional component with it typically. And so people have tried to get a correspondence between the age of the person today and when might their most feeling of engaged time of their life in society and with people, and what music was popular then. And of course, you can get help from family members about maybe this person is classical music and this person is rock and roll. And so you make adjustments and try a piece of music and see how that fits them, and find the ones that fit. And maybe you can, download that on a computer and have it on a stick, or like I said, Banner Institute has a disc that they have found useful for the Southwest area. And the collective singing is something that often happens when you play the music back to someone, that they will sing along with it. Now, singing with a group, I have not personally seen that, but I think that would be something that would be very good, very helpful, and certainly have a feeling of connectedness with others, even if you can't articulate that with words anymore. The experience and feeling of it is something that is like food. It is good for the spirit.
We have a lot of wonderful comments. Thank you, Dr. Henderson, for that. We do have a lot of wonderful comments. I think one of the other comments is about food. So what we have is another slide that we will be talking about. Marianne, did you want to talk about our food wrap cards?
So we also have released our series of 6 healthy food, healthy brain rat cards. These healthy eating focused messages are a series, and they include practical advice as well as culture relevant recipes on them. The rat cards are a quick reference for community members to learn about the connection of eating healthy and brain health, kind of like we've talked a little bit about. And you can scan that QR code and actually request some printed copies We also have other resources available as well.
We
Could I
have
chime
another-
in?
Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to point out something that another colleague, Dr. Jordan Lewis, who's Alaska Native, is working with using traditional foods as a stimulus for the older person, just like we were talking about using music earlier, and to for whatever the person can manage, whatever capacity is, going from its preparation to eating it. And maybe they can only do the eating part of it now, but there still is a lot of stimulation brain stimulation that comes from having experience of food from their earlier life.
we have another question from Lisa Nelson. But first, before I read Lisa's question, I want to ask for some feedback from the group. We appreciate your feedback. So if you could please share us how you felt about today's webinar and what current or new resources are your communities looking for or in need of, and what would make good webinar topics for the communities that you work with. So just go ahead and think about those and drop them in the chat. And we have a question from Lisa Nelson. She says, are there evidence-based programs for family caregivers that encompasses dementia, which is culturally impactful?
The first thing that comes to mind for me, you may have heard of the Savvy Caregiver, and with a panel of people and the National Indian Council on Aging and the Administration on Aging from some time back, provided funding for myself and the group to indigenize the original Savvy Caregiver, which is evidence-based. The indigenized version does not change one word of the original. We add to it, however. And what we add to it are matters that relate to native life, whether it's Alaska or Oklahoma or Minnesota or wherever it may be, and help the caregiver or help a person providing this Savvy Caregiver for Indian country education hints about here's how you can make this fit your local area. And so if in Choctaw Nation here in Oklahoma, we're not going to have a whole lot about salmon and salmon fishing, but in the Northwest coast, then that's where you might bring that part out. And by bring that out, meaning to use the food or canoe journeys, if you're up that direction, and make the topic areas of dealing with the person getting up in the morning or using this ceremony of honor and caregiving that will mobilize the local culture for that tribal area or that specific tribe, that specific community. And in that way, we try to make this usable across all of Indian country, which was a big challenge. And I just also want to throw in an endorsement about the importance of whole food, which was native food in the past. That was whole food. And going back to that can be very helpful and deal with metabolic problems such as comes from type 2 diabetes and its influence on brain function.
Thank you. So what's on the screen now is this is a three-part webinar series. The next one we're going to have is just the one you see on your screen right now, and it kind of leads right into what we're talking about, traditional foods, traditional native foods, and brain health. And then we have the last one. Can you show the last one, Bree? The next one?
Yeah, the first one's going to be July 19th, and it's going to be on tribal resolutions on brain health. And then the last one is going to be on traditional native foods and brain health.
Thank you. Thank you, Bree. So we're just about a minute to the closing of our webinar. And we've had questions. We have a lot of comments. We're going to go through those and we'll get back to you if needed. And look at our website. There's a lot of resources on there that, can help you. And if you have questions, you can email any one of us with your questions, and we'll make sure to get back to you. And we also provide technical assistance, and we have all kinds of offerings for those of you who work with this population. So with that, we'll wrap this up. Thank you very much for attending our webinar. We enjoyed meeting with you, and we will see you next time. Thank you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Henderson.
Okay, that's a wrap for one of three.